Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It is Thursday, January 25th, and it's now 5:15 p.m. I am Kaden Arthur Spinock. I am a council member of the Construction Industry Council, a member also of the Association of Land Economy and Valuation Surveyors. I am a facilities manager here at the Planning Institute of Jamaica. But today I am your humble host for the evening. Let me commence by saying thank you to the Construction Industry Council facilitating this webinar. And as we go through, we're going to emphasize a lot on our theme today, which is the Jamaica Building Act, a panacea for the built environment. Really, is it a solution to what is happening here in the built environment in Jamaica? Enacted in 2018, the Building Act seeks to facilitate the adoption and efficient application of the national building standards to ensure the promotion and acceptance of sustainable development and internationally accepted health and safety standards in the local built environment. Now, a review of the legislation will reveal that the Building Professional Council, the Building Advisory Council, Building Practitioners Board, and Building Panel Tribunal are pivotal for the effective administration of the Act. But it is also evident that the performance of the four bodies is predicated on the relevance of the regulations provided in the National Building Code. The National Building Code was created, at least in part, through the adoption of international building codes, which begs questions centering on the process of adoption, the linkages between the International Building Code and the relevant local building laws and regulations. How and the processes by which the International Building Code has been modified to reflect local practices, and what are the implications of the adaptation or the modification to the processes. So our objectives here tonight, really, or this evening, is to assess the performance of the Building Act 4 years post-enactment through an exploration that will consist of the probe of the historical, social, and regulatory drivers of the current Building Act, a description of the roles and functions of the local government, the Bureau of Standards, and their agents as necessitated by the Building Act, a dissection of the development of the National Building Code, and a critical analysis of the role and applicability of the National Building Code in the local built environment and the implications of its utilization therein. Now, our structure for this webinar is a multimodal presentation, a case study examination, and a panel discussion, which will form the structure for us examining the topic for this evening. Now, before we dive into the matter at hand, let me first introduce to you Mr. Dean Bradshaw, Chairman of the Construction Industry Council, as he brings greeting. Mr. Bradshaw, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Kadian. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, our panelists, and our participants. Welcome to our CIC's webinar. As was mentioned, my name is Dean Bradshaw. I'm the sitting chairman of the Construction Industry Council, and I am a commissioned land surveyor by profession. I'm in private practice, and I'm also a member of the LSAJ Executive Council. As a part of the council, we have embarked on this webinar to, as Kaden has mentioned, to really examine the Building Act, to make those of us who are not aware of it more aware, to see how, to examine and explore how it affects our varying professions and member professions in the built environment, and also to really look at its effectiveness and where improvements can be made and how we can utilize it to really one, monitor our industry, regulate it, and also ensure that best practices occur and that, of course, our professions and the act facilitates the development as we'd like for our country and our nation and our economy. So we have a wide spectrum of panelists and presenters to give us a perspective from varied angles of how the act works and how it's intended to work. And so I will now turn over to them and to the co-hosts, to the hosts, and just welcome and thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate, and hope that at the end of this webinar, we would have garnered some more information and enhanced how we practice, in the industry, and perhaps spur on further discussions and at a later date. So welcome the participation from everyone, and thank you for attending.
Thank you too, Mr. Bradshaw. That's getting my feedback. Okay. All right. So we appreciate the greetings you brought, Mr. Bradshaw, and we now move on to accepting greetings from Mr. Junior Rose, the representative for the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. Mr. Rose, the floor is now yours.
My name is Junior Rose, Senior Director, Strategic Policy Planning and Reform Division, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. Mr. Dean Bradshaw, Chairman of the Construction Industry Council, Presidents of the Member Association of the Construction Industry Council, members of the council, fellow presenters and panelists, other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Mr. Rose, excuse me, we can't, I know you had your camera on the last time, but we can't see you now.
Okay. 1 second.
Yes, we can see now. Thank you.
Apologies, technology. I bring remarks on behalf of the Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, on this very, very important subject of the Jamaica Building Act, a panacea for the building environment. The subject of today's discussion is an interesting one. While it is difficult to describe any piece of legislation as being the total solution to the issues it is designated to address, I would certainly argue that the Building Act is close to a panacea as is possible for a law to be. I say this because the Act captures a truly comprehensive range of matters concerning the systems, operations, and personnel in the construction sector, the built environment and natural environment as well. I also say this because the Act emerged after lengthy and extensive consultations involving public and private sector stakeholders, including what is now the Construction Industry Council, and gives them legal authority in specific standard setting and regulatory structure that it contains. Some of you who are seasoned members of the construction industry will remember the many stops and starts that have ultimately led to us creating what is now the Building Act. It is the product of nearly 15 years of consultations and amendments across political administration, and was first tabled in Parliament as the National Building Bill in September 2011. With the change of government in that year, the bill was revised and was tabled again in January 2016 after which Parliament was dismissed ahead of general election and the next month. Once again, the administration changed. And with deep and more widespread discussion with partners in the construction industry, the current act was tabled and approved by Parliament. This conversation is about the effectiveness of the Building Act. It's timely because of the proven resilience of the construction sector in general and its importance to Jamaica's economic growth and development objectives. In just under 2 months, we will mark a year since the order to the Disaster Risk Management Act were formally withdrawn in Parliament. As is well known, the order facilitated the close management of COVID-19 since its arrival here, March 2020, and challenged us, and indeed all the world, in unprecedented ways. The construction sector was one of the areas of the economy activity that showed notable activity during the ravages of the pandemic. Critically also is the value of the sector in continuing to grow. GDP from construction in terms of money value increased from 11,986 million US in the second quarter 2022 to 14,569 million in the third quarter. This figure is projected to increase 16,855 million by the end of the financial year. In the last financial year, 4,032 building permits were issued, valued over $130 billion. This is a 24.5% percentage increase over the total number of building permits issued 2020-2021 financial year. 83% of these permits were issued within the benchmark 90 days. Additionally, in the last financial year, 4,542 applications for permits were received, reflecting an investment value of $171.5 billion. This is an 11.8% increase over the number of applications submitted in the previous financial year. This local performance is in line with the contribution of the construction industry at the global level. It is easily one of the world's largest sector, representing 13% of GDP, reflecting an average annual spend of over 10 trillion US. Our challenge, and it is a challenge that the Act anticipates, is that of creating and maintaining order. It requires the close management of our vibrant construction sector at every level. From domestic house expansion to mega-sized hotel projects, the evidence of building activity is easily visible across the country. Our local authorities, who are the local building authorities, have a duty to ensure that building work result as a result of the approved plan, and that the detail of approved projects are not reached. It is a huge and difficult task, but by way of example, in 2022, the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation, which is a local building authority in the parishes of Kingston and St. Andrew, conducted 352 detailed building inspections and issued 128 stop notices against construction projects. On the other side of the island, the St. James Municipal Corporation conducted over 1,000 building inspections, issued 44 stop orders, with one demolition. Now, included in this number are developers, large and small, who deliberately breach the permits they were issued and erect structure that exceed the height or number of rooms allowed for their project, thus creating disorder, bringing them into conflict with communities which they operate. Up to last year, the KCMC had to approach the Supreme Court to halt a number of sizable apartment projects. In one notorious case, which I will not specify at this time, the developer appealed to the court to set aside the demolition order on the basis that while he had breached the permit, building had more rooms and floor than allowed, he did not wish to lose what he describes as his investment. There are other practices that mitigate against the effort to ensure order in the built environment. One such practice is that of having sand, gravel, block unloaded onto the sidewalk, thereby forcing pedestrians to walk into the road and into part of motor vehicles. Then there are those who tip large amounts of construction waste into gullies in the dead of night. The unwanted block pieces, sand, stone from solid layer in gullies, which then overflow easily when rain cause damage to life and livelihood. These are some of the practical issues that we are working to overcome. However, the Building Act is the full 360-degree legal and regulatory framework for their resolution. It is far more than the legislation that gives effect to the National Building. There are other legislation, 20 other acts that operate in conjunction with the Building Act, including the Strata Titles Act, Professional Engineer Registration Act, Housing Act, Real Estate Act, Town and Country Planning Act, to name a few. The establishment of the Bureau of Standards as the Standards Authority is intended to address the quality of building materials, such as blocks. The registration and accreditation of builders and building practitioners in the construction industry are also addressed by the Act and managed by the Building Practitioners Board, which include members association of the Construction Industry Council. The role of the Building Advisory Council and the Building Appeals Tribunal are critical to the more orderly built environment that is being created to meet the needs of our citizens, as well as all those who visit our island from overseas. The reality is that the Building Act provides a proper and credible framework within which local authorities, the ministry, and you, the professional associations in the Construction Industry Council, who are named as regulatory partners in the legislation, can expand and improve our collective operational capacity to effectively manage the built environment. As we continue to demonstrate the will to work in this direction, we will achieve greater spatial harmony, especially in urban centers, and we will erect buildings with unrivaled structural integrity, which will create a range of builders and building practitioners with unquestioned expertise. I am pleased to be a part of this session, and I look forward to the perspective that will emerge from this evening's meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Rose. Your presentation is well received. We appreciate your confidence in the Act, highlighting how long it has taken us to get here, 15 years, and helping us to see that the construction industry is a buoyant industry, and us getting it right is crucial. And therefore, our examining the Act and how we play a role in it is very vital. Thank you, Mr. Rose.
Thanks.
We will now move on to Ms. Tamara Bradshaw. She's architect and CIC Council representative. She will now introduce our speakers. That is Mr. Noel Da Costa, Mr. Woodstock, Mr. David Allen, Mr. Roosevelt Da Costa. Ms. Tamara Bradshaw, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome you to our webinar. Today, we are here to listen and learn about the Jamaica Building Act, a panacea for the built environment. In the last 10 years, a team of building professionals were given the task to revise the Building Code of Jamaica and also the Building Act of Jamaica. Today, aspects of the Building Act will be presented to us, and I'm sure we are eager to learn about the changes that have been made to date. So it's indeed a pleasure to introduce our first speaker or presenter, Mr. Noel Da Costa. Mr. Noel Da Costa is a founding partner of the Gentech Group of engineering companies. He's a trained chemical engineer. He has a postgraduate degree in engineering and business administration, as well as professional qualifications in brewing and insurance. He's a registered engineer in Jamaica and a fellow and past president of the Jamaica Institute of Engineers. He's also a fellow of the Institution of Chemical Engineers in the UK. Mr. Noel Da Costa serves on the board of directors of many organizations in both the private and public sector, covering manufacturing, finance, insurance, regulation, and philanthropy. He's a director and past president of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce and a past chairman of the Caribbean Council of the United Way. In 2003, he assembled and led a multidisciplinary committee that prepared a modern building code for Jamaica and worked on the National Building Act. He was awarded Commander of the Order of Distinction for his contribution to engineering and manufacturing, and an honorary Doctor of Technology by UTech for the nation building. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Noel Da Costa.
Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw, and all protocols observed. I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to see?
Yes, Mr. Bradshaw. Yes, Mr. Da Costa.
Okay. Okay. I'll just get right into it. I'm going to give up sort of a historical perspective to the topic we're talking about today. And I'll start with the building codes. And the appropriate building codes are the first line of defense against damage from natural hazards and exists primarily to safeguard public safety. And they embody the accumulated knowledge of scientists, engineers, and building professionals. And there are provisions that must be observed if lives are to be protected, physical damage is limited, and structures critical to human welfare, such as hospitals and shelters, can remain operational during catastrophes. They must be updated regularly to include new technological developments as well as new information after disasters. And just to give you an example of that, after Hurricane Charlie in 2004 in Florida, they did a retrospective study on the code that was prepared after the hurricane. And they found that if that code was available prior to the hurricane, 60% of the damage would have been avoided. Now, how is this relevant for Jamaica? Well, our built environment is a significant component of our national assets. 50 to 70% of buildings are informal, that is, designed without professional input, and less than 25% of residential buildings are designed by registered professionals. It's relevant also because we are located in the Atlantic Hurricane Belt. We have low-lying coastal zones and high mountainous topography. We are crossed by major fault lines, including the Enriquillo Planting Garden Fault Zone. And climate change models for Jamaica predict increased frequency of adverse national events, natural events. In 2003, Jamaica Institution of Engineers led a stakeholder team that adopted the International Building Code as the base document and developed what we call application documents for use in Jamaica. We did that against the background that the existing code, building code in Jamaica, was 109 years old at the time and woefully outdated. By going the route of adopting the IBC as a base code, there was no need to reinvent the wheel because that code covers all disasters that affect Jamaica, such as hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, landslides, storm surges, etc. It's an easy way to stay current with technological advances that improve the quality and safety of the environment, and we would have solved the updating issue, which was one of the factors that made the previous codes that were used in the Caribbean, the cubic code, pretty much obsolete because updating it was proven to be a bridge too far. Also, there is easier access to standardized training for those involved in the building industry. In 2009, the JIE handed over 11 application documents to the government, and the IBC plus the application document constitute Jamaica's building code, which are currently held as voluntary standards by the Bureau of Standards. I'd like to pause here to recognize the over 108 engineers who worked assiduously over the period 2003 to 2009, 6 years, to produce the building code. And to point out that this was all voluntary work. Nobody was paid to do this. The value of that work was, we estimated at the time, in excess of 350 million Jamaican dollars. And that was a gift to the nation from the JIE and the engineering and building professional fraternity. Now, the JIE and the Bureau initiated activities to develop a new building act and regulations, because without the act, the code would be a voluntary document as it was before, and really would have been of no effect because it couldn't be enforced. Several stakeholders from government, the NGO community, and the private sector brainstorm what the act should look like. And these are some of the purposes of for the act: to give effect to the National Building Code, to regulate building works and change of building use, to regulate training standards, certification and licensing of building practitioners, and recognition of building professionals, to define the scope of work to be done by building professionals as opposed to building practitioners, to avoid what you're seeing on the screen right now, to define the role of the Bureau of Standards in relation to building and building works, to put more focus on quality of construction materials, the previous, and construction practices, and to ensure that a building permit is obtained to carry out building work, to promote cost effectiveness in the construction of buildings, require construction of environmentally friendly and efficient buildings, and require that buildings provide adequate amenities for public, including persons with disabilities. To provide for effective and efficient systems for issuing building permits, certificates of occupancy, define the role and function of the building authorities and building officials, and establish a system to resolve building disputes, as well as an appeal process. This would entail a repeal of the KSAC Building Act, the Paris Council Building Act, and preservations of the laws relevant to the building industry. So, the Building Act of 2018 establishes three important entities that will impact the regulatory process. The first is the Building Advisory Council, and their role is to advise government on administration of the Act, any regulations made, recommend policies, strategies, plans, and programs for the building industry, and to recommend ad hoc advisory committees to undertake special tasks. At the time of the drafting of the Act, the Building Advisory Council had a membership of 7 nominees of each of the ministers responsible for construction, public works, and local government, nominees of each of the presidents of the JIE, the Jamaican Institute of Architects, the Construction Industry Council, the government town planner, and such other persons who the minister feels could add value. The second is the Building Practitioners Board. And this is to define categories of practice of building practitioners and the scope and nature of building works they are licensed to carry out, set qualification and other criteria for their licenses, and to keep a register of licensed practitioners, review the performance of building practitioners and apply sanctions where appropriate, and conduct examinations of persons applying for license as building practitioners. It was a 9-membership board with 5 members appointed by the minister, and these should be an architect, engineer, attorney, building practitioner nominated by the Construction Industry Council, and 1 other who is not a building practitioner, and 4 members representing UTEC, Bureau of Standards, Art and Just NTA, and the Registrar of the Building Practitioners Board. The third body is the Building Appeals Tribunal, and they should adjudicate appeals against decisions that are made by the local authorities related to interpretation and implementation of National Building Code and any regulations made under the Act. And they would consist of a chairman appointed by the minister, an attorney at law appointed by the minister, and a nominee of the Construction Industry Council. So what will be different? Well, building professionals are those persons who are registered under the existing acts for the registration of architects, engineers, and land surveyors. Building practitioners are builders and draftsmen other than those formally registered architects and engineers, and they will be licensed by the Building Practitioners Board, and they will be allowed, as you will hear from subsequent speakers, to perform buildings that within specific limitations. For example, the National Building Act allows building professionals to design buildings under all the codes of the building code, the National Building Code, while the licensed builders practitioners can design buildings only under the residential small building code. The residential small building code, and this is written into the code, does not allow building practitioners to design buildings that are larger than 300 square meters or buildings less than 300 square meters that are determined to be complex. And the complexity is also specified in the building code itself. It will require that any person carrying out building work, design, construction, erection, alteration, repair, extension, modification, demolition, removal, and change of use will have to get a permit to do so. And code compliant designs and construction should be carried out only by legal, registered, or licensed persons. Provisions for building accessibility by disabled persons will be required. Sanitary facilities and amenities for public buildings, water harvesting, energy efficiency, heritage preservation. That means we're not knocking down any and every old building, because some of them contain a great part of our heritage and historical aspects that need to be preserved. There are penalties for code infringement. Construction stage approval will now be required, and the local authority will issue permits for modifications, change of use, or occupancy, among other permits. And actions throughout the building process, but throughout the approval process, are to be time bound. So we won't have lagging of construction works waiting on permits, because they will all be time bound. And there will be a technical tribunal to conciliate disputes as against going to courthouse. Now, the building bill was passed in 2017 and by the Senate in 2018, passed in Parliament. And the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, along with industry stakeholders, are developing drafting instructions for the regulations to the Act, which are currently being worked on. So drafting instructions developed to date include classifications of buildings, permits and licenses, control of activities relating to the building process, payments of fees and charges, timelines for response to application, requirements regarding public notice seeking approval for erection or for change of use of a building, and the licensing of building practitioners. These regulations have already been drafted, and I think they're on the way to the CPC. Also, enforcement and compliance measures for the certificates of occupancy, forms and procedures for submissions of application and building permits, records and information, and water harvesting. So quite a few of the regulations have already been put together, and they're somewhere in legal limbo. But the sooner we can get them going is the better for all concerned. Drafting instructions have been sent to the CPC. They will then pass to the ministry for further action, and the minister will declare a date when the act is to come into operation. So what are the next steps? There is a World Bank Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, and that will assist to help define a pathway for implementation of the code, support training needs, bring the International Code Council further into the process. And I think my colleague Roosevelt, same surname, Da Costa, will speak more about that and where we are with that process, because moderator, you asked that issue, you mentioned that issue initially, And I think it's clear that we can work with the International Code Council to improve what we do locally and also to help to simplify the code documents. So that is a quick tour of what brought us to where we are. And I thank you for your attention. Back to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Da Costa. And I am now going to be presenting to you our second presenter. It is with great honor that I introduce to you our next presenter. He's a colleague and a mentor and a trailblazer in the field of architecture. His name is Mr. Robert V. Woodstock. Architect Woodstock is a registered architect in Jamaica and Barbados with over 37 years of experience at a senior level in architectural practice and is currently managing principal at Harold Morrison and Woodstock Associates Limited and HM and RW Architects Limited. He studied architecture at Cornell University on a government scholarship, then returned to Jamaica to work with the Ministry of Construction or Works before joining his present firm. His professional practice experience includes working on a wide range of educational, health, judicial, industrial, commercial, resort, and residential projects all over Jamaica and Barbados. Architect Woodstock is a fellow of the Jamaica Institute of Architects, current chair of the Architect Registration Board and the JIA's Practice and Disciplinary Committees. He is co-chair of the Town and Country Planning Authorities Forward Planning Committee, past chair of the Association of the Commonwealth Societies of Architects in the Caribbean, and he's a past president of the JIA, past chair of the JIA's Education and Membership Committee, and past chair of the Construction Industry Council. He has also acted as a visiting critique, adjunct design lecturer, external examiner, and advisory board member of the Caribbean School of Architecture, as well as an overseas examiner and international architectural juror. In addition to several local architectural design awards, Mr. Woodstock was the first recipient of the Caribbean Building Awards Honorary Award for Outstanding Contribution to Architecture, and later received the esteemed Honorary Membership Award from the Trinidad and Tobago Institute of Architects for his regional contributions and exceptional leadership in the field of architecture. Mr. Woodstock chaired a group representing the Architects Registration Board, the Jamaica Institute of Architects, and the Caribbean School of Architecture that reviewed and made recommendations outlining serious concerns with the early drafts of the Building Act, and was part of the technical team assisting the CDB with looking at Caribbean uniform building standards for the English-speaking Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to present to you or introduce to you Architect Robert V. Woodstock.
Thank you very much. Can you allow me to share?
You're able to share, Mr. Woodstock.
I'm able to share. I screen share and says who can share. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. My presentation is in two parts. Firstly, an overview and background of the architect's involvement with the building bill. And secondly, a look at a few of the sections of the 2018 Act that architects in particular should be aware of. I say a few as time obviously does not permit a presentation on all the important sections. Presenter DeCosta, who preceded me, has covered a number of the areas that are also in my repetition, that are also in my presentation. So forgive me for the repetition, but it will give emphasis. Everyone agrees that we needed a new building act. We all knew that the existing acts regulating building construction were outdated. We all supported the development of a modern legislative framework based on the need to reduce the vulnerability of the built environment, ensure public health, safety, and welfare, minimize damage caused by natural or man-made hazards, prevent squatter settlements, and promote sustainable development. So architects endorsed, in principle, the new provisions for ensuring the safety in building environment, for enhancing barrier-free amenities, for promoting sustainable development, and for better regulation in the building industry. Overall, the architectural fraternity supports the memorandum and objects and reasons listed in the bill. Among the considerations was, which makes a lot of sense, creating a single act instead of a number of different building acts, and prescribing of the standards for a separate national building code and the legal recognition of that code. Bill also addressed a number of other things, including, and most importantly, the recognition of the relevant provisions of the Jamaica Heritage Trust Act. It also, for the first time, expressly ensured provisions for the rights of persons with disabilities and for the provision of proper sanitary facilities, both in public and private buildings. The new act is applicable to all entities of the state. That is, it binds the crown. And that, I think, is most important. As I said, it provides the provision for the legal adoption of the International Building Codes as a National Building Code of Jamaica. And equally important, it confirms the Jamaica Bureau of Standards as a standards authority with power to specify the version of the international codes which are to be used. A little background. When this started, therefore, the architects had no problem with the concept of the new building bill. However, there were a number of serious concerns that the architects had, which, if not fully addressed, in our opinion, would result in the continued degradation of our physical environment and further descent of our country into a ramshackle state. The bill was originally tabled in 2011 and reviewed by the ARB and PERB, who raised a number of concerns with the then Minister, Omar Davies. There were 6 key considerations, and those are listed above. Unfortunately, there was a hiatus, and the issue may have been dropped off the minister's agenda. So it was rekindled when the new board took office and raised at our meeting with the then portfolio minister, Maurice Guy, in 2013. Apparently, both ministers had been led to believe that the architect's registration board and the engineers' concerns, which they believe had been agreed, had been incorporated, but it was not. The next time we heard about the bill was when one of our very curious architects contacted the senior legal counsel at the Ministry of Local Government to get an update on the status of the bill. He was informed that a revised draft of the bill was received from the Ministry of Justice and was being reviewed as the final draft to be submitted to the Select Committee of Parliament. Importantly, he was advised that there could be no further comment from the public and that the document was not available for examination. This led to a barrage of correspondence from the architects to various ministers and other persons responsible for the Building Act. And we were able to have a meeting with Minister Ascott, who indicated that he thought that the concerns raised by the architects and engineers had been addressed in the 2013 June draft. We were given a hard copy of the draft and 2 weeks to review it and make comments. This was done as a joint effort between representatives of the Architects Registration Board, the Jamaican Institute of Architects, and the Caribbean School of Architecture, resulting in 6 major concerns that were raised in a letter to Minister Ascott in August 2013. The 6 concerns raised by the ARB was the recognition of existing professional registration acts, which was not recognized in the bill at the time, recognition of existing registered building professionals, which was also not recognized, the definition of building practitioner, application of building permits, the practice of architecture by non-architects, and the inconsistency of the bill with the proposed economic, well, not proposed, with the economic partnership agreement that Jamaica had signed. Concern 1, the architects felt that the draft bill did not, but should expressly recognize existing professional registration acts. And in particular for the Architects Registration Act, and for the Engineers, the Engineers Registration Act. Architects and engineers ought to be the only professionals responsible for the preparation, supervision, and submission of drawings prepared for building approval. Further, the architects felt strongly that if the Building Act was inconsistent with the Architects Registration Act, then, so far as practicable, should be read so as to resolve the inconsistency. The provision of the Building Act should cease to have effect in that particular area. Concern number 2, recognition of existing registered building professionals. The architects felt that the draft building bill did not, but should expressly recognize existing registered building professionals, such as registered architects, and that they should be treated as already licensed, and therefore the Building Act should expressly state that the licensing provisions in the Act did not apply to existing registered building professionals. Concern number 3, the definition of building practitioner. The architects had a major concern with the then definition of the term building practitioner as under the then Building Act, which was meant as somebody engaged in the design of a building. The design of a building involves the practice of architecture. The definition of building practitioner was therefore in conflict with the Architects Registration Act, which states that a person shall be deemed to carry on the practice of architecture if he practices any branch of the profession, or if by verbal claim and holds himself out as being able to perform or does perform any architectural service or work. The architects felt that in the new building bill, the term building practitioner should be confined to the implementers, such as works contractors, tradesmen, and most importantly, the word design should be removed. Concern number 4, application for building permits. Memorandums of objects and reasons The bill stated that building professionals will now submit plans or designs and ensure that buildings are constructed in compliance with the approved building code. The architects agreed with this, but in looking at the draft, felt that the bill should expressly require all architectural drawings submitted with the application for a building permit to be stamped and sealed by a registered architect, and similarly by professional engineers for engineering drawings. Concern number 5, practice of architecture by non-architects. There's a serious issue of public safety that continues to be compromised, and a tour of Jamaica, even now, will illustrate the extent to which our built environment is being degraded and devalued. Because of the lack of suitable legislation, the practice of architecture being carried out by persons not registered in Jamaica to do so, despite the fact that courses leading to professional degrees in architecture and in engineering, as well as other areas of the building industry, have been offered in Jamaica for several years now. The architects felt that the new building bill should seek to ensure that non-architects are not permitted to practice architecture. While it was possible an exception in terms of being prepared by non-registered persons, submitted for small single-family residences on relatively flat sites, single-story, no slope more than 10 degrees, and maximum area of 100 square meters. The architects felt that even with this requirement, there was no longer any excuse for non-professionals to not properly regularize themselves and become architects, engineers, surveyors, etc. Concern number 6, the inconsistency with the economic partnership agreement. The Jamaican government had signed the EPA with the European Union. Because of the lack of suitable legislation, the practice of architecture is being carried out by persons not registered in Jamaica to do so. And this practice extends to architects from other countries, sometimes with the complicity of our government as well as private sector enterprises. Jamaican professionals are not allowed to practice in other countries without undergoing a registration process. But currently, on the EU CARIFORUM EPA, the architects in the region are engaged in the formulation of an MRA, a process stimulated and funded by CARICOM and the Office of Trade Negotiations. It is therefore extremely difficult to contemplate the operation of these agreements in a country where architects and engineers were not even named in the Building Acts. After several years of lobbying, it would be reasonable to conclude that most of the architects' concerns have been addressed, if not completely, at least partially. Although there is still a great deal of concern about non-architects designing buildings with a floor area up to 3,000 square feet. The bill was modified in 2016 and later passed on the 7th of November 2017 in the House of Representatives with 24 amendments. It was passed on the 26th of January 2018 in the Senate with 30 amendments, and these amendments were agreed by the House of Representatives on the 6th of February 2018. The Act number 3 of 2018 was then signed by the Governor General on the 9th of March 2018. And now I will deal with certain sections and the arrangement of sections. The 2013 bill was divided into 10 parts with 4 schedules and a total of 96 sections. The 2018 Act has 4 more parts with a total of 86 sections or 10 less. The 4 new parts are as follows. I've highlighted them in red. Part 4, restrictions on change of use. Part 9, water harvesting and energy conservation. Part 12, Building Advisory Council, which I think, yeah, Building Advisory Council. And Part 13, Restrictions, Offenses, and Penalties. There are a few sections that I now like to highlight changes and sections that architects and applicants ought to be familiar with, and if not, ought to familiarize themselves with. These sections are as follows. And I've reduced them in the interest of time. I wanted to spend time on part 3, but that will not be permitted. Part 1, which is preliminary, I want to focus on sections 1 or certain sections within section 1, interpretation, in section 2, objects of the act, section 5, preservation of other laws, and then in part 2, regulatory and enforcement responsibilities of a local authority, most importantly, the functions of the local authority, and then I'll briefly touch on some areas that I think are important to note for the Chief Engineering Officer. So part 1 consists of 6 sections, and the most relevant for us today would be sections 2, 3, and 6. In section 2, I want to highlight the definition of builder and of building. And most importantly, the building practitioner, because that has evolved since 2011, where it was defined as seen now. This was then changed because he was also a licensed building practitioner. Then there was a practitioner who was allowed to design but was not eligible to be registered under the Act, to 2018, where the building practitioner means a person other than a building professional and who is now licensed or will be licensed under the Act. Building work. And this is important, particularly when you look at the permitting and so on later on. But building work means the design, construction, erection, alteration, repair, extension, modification, demolition, or removal of a building. And then it goes on to list a number of the associated areas. So, for example, on page 4, any increase in the height of a building, any operation normally undertaken by a person carrying on the business of construction, and work of any kind declared by the minister to be building work for the purposes of the Act. Section 3, objects of the Act. Importantly, to regulate building work and change of building use by requiring the obtaining of building permits in connection with the building work and change of building use so as to protect the public safety and public health. I think that is critical. And of course, to give effect to the building code, to enhance amenities in general and require the construction of buildings that provide sanitary facilities, easy access, and adequate amenities for members of the public in general and persons with disabilities in particular. And I want to highlight, most importantly, to promote cost effectiveness in the construction of buildings, because that's an area that I've been getting feedback from architects on and we'll be discussing in more, well, not in this presentation, but needs to be discussed further. To require the construction of environmentally friendly and energy efficient buildings, to establish efficient and effective system of issuing permits and certificates of occupancy. And of course, just one last one to highlight, which in all areas will be included, to establish a building appeal process. There's always the allowance and where you can appeal. Lastly, under this section, we have the preservation of other laws. And so the concerns of the architects have been addressed, and the Architects Registration Act has now been included, where it states that the act shall be in addition to, and not in derogation of or in substitution of the provisions of the Architects Registration Act. And as importantly, nothing in part 11, which deals with the building practitioner, shall be deemed to be in derogation of or inconsistent with any specified enactment. And then it goes on to list the meaning of specified enactment, which covers the Architects Registration Act and the Professional Engineers Act. So both of them have been covered, and I believe have addressed the concerns of the architects. And the last is the functions of the local authority in part 2, regulatory and enforcement. Just to note that the local authorities administer and enforce the provisions of the Act. And in these slides, what I've done is anything in red is new in the 2018 Act. Anything in gray and striked out was what was in the previous Act that has now been omitted. And anything that's underlined and in bold is just for emphasis. The issue of certificates of compliance and certificates of occupancy. And this item G, I want to emphasize, to ensure that designs submitted in respect of building applications are in compliance with this Act, the National Building Code, or any other regulations made under this Act. And finally, I just want to briefly touch on the Chief Engineering Officer, which used to be the building surveyor, and to note that he has superintendence of all buildings and building works within the area of the jurisdiction of the local authority. He has to ensure that building work is undertaken in accordance with the Act. And he has to ensure that, and this is most important, certainly to most architects, that applications for building permits are processed in a timely manner. And there are a number of things issued there in terms of certificates in a timely manner. He has to submit his reports in a timely manner, and so on. And lastly, I want to highlight the conflict of interest, where the Chief Engineering Officer or any other building official appointed by the local authority shall not engage in any private work or carry out any function in respect of the design and supervision of an application for a building permit or the construction and supervision of building works. I will note in closing this, that previously there was a stipulation that you couldn't do it within the jurisdiction of the local building authority. Now that has, which I think is a good thing, has been struck out. So the chief engineering officer and the other building officer cannot do it, whether it's in their jurisdiction or not. The National Building Code, I won't go into that because I'm sure one of our next presenters will deal with that adequately, and based on time, it will already be extensively dealt with. So 3 sections there. But before ending, I would like to conclude that we have come a long way, but we still have a way to go. And some of the objects and reasons of the Building Act have still not been met. The processing period, from my point of view, is now much longer. And there used to be a thing where if it took more than 90 days, you could actually start the work. That clause, I think, has been taken out, and I think it should be put back in. Other agencies that used to be very helpful and efficient with quick turnaround times are now stepping outside of their remit and demanding unreasonable requirements. And they're using the building code as an excuse. I have an example of a building of 212 square feet with a single stair where they asked for an additional stair of around 29 square meters, ending up that the stairs took up 25% of the, more than 25% of the overall area of the building, which, as far as I'm concerned, is ridiculous. So costs, separate and apart from the normal increase in costs of materials and logistic shipping issues associated with COVID, have gone up. And we've been seeing this from late 2018 and in 2019 before the pandemic. Architects also complain about the cost of purchasing the various codes and application documents and so on. Section 83, Part 14 of the Act speaks to the minister carrying out a review of the operation and effectiveness of the code as soon as is practicable after the expiration of 3 years from the appointed day. The Act has now been in for more than 3 years. So I believe this webinar can be used as a kickstart to review by professionals the acts and areas that they believe are not working in their best interests. I know with respect to the architects, the Jamaica Institute of Architects will be doing a survey amongst its members to get more detailed responses on the operation and effectiveness of the Act. And we hope to share this feedback with the minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodstock. It's a pretty extensive presentation as it pertains to the Building Act. And it goes to show that there's a lot of work that has been put in, and the transformation as it pertains to the processing and the definitions, the objects, the preservation of other laws pertaining to the Act, and the regulatory enforcement has been taken into consideration. So we'd like to thank you and Mr. Da Costa. For the next presenter, I'll be introducing to you Mr. David Adrian Allen. He has a distinguished career in engineering. And David Allen is a registered professional civil engineer and principal engineer of David Allen and Associates, a firm registered in Jamaica since 2013. David Allen has 30 years of experience in the field of civil and structural engineering. He provides services in the construction materials and evaluation, structural assessment, design of buildings, and playground equipment assessment. Mr. Allen has provided engineering consultancy to a wide field of clients, both in the public and private sectors, including doing structural assessments, work for the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica and the British High Commission in Jamaica. David Adrian Allen is a he's a realtor as well with Century 21, and he's also a Justice of Peace. He has served as a director for the Ministry of Justice, and he's currently a director of that ministry. He has also served as a director for the Ministry of Transport and Mining. He also was a senior engineer at the Bureau of Standards. He also was a part-time lecturer at the University of Technology, Jamaica. He also served as a civil engineer at Gentech Consultants Limited. He's also a civil engineer, was also a civil engineer at the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited. His professional affiliations are in the Jamaica Institute of Engineers, the JIE, as a corporate member since 2011. He's also a part of the technical committee of the National Building Code Technical Committee. He's also a member of the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica. And as stated before, he's a realtor. So I would love for all of you to join me in welcoming Mr. David Allen as he presents his presentation on the building code. You're on mute, Mr. Allen.
Yes, my pleasant afternoon. Thank you for that introduction. I will now share my screen. I hope I can. Okay, I'm hoping you're seeing the screen. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can, Mr. Allen.
Okay, well, pleasant afternoon again. Right, it is sometimes a bit of injustice to present after the renowned Noel Acosta and you know, the very established architect, Panacea just come on, the building code. But nonetheless, what I'm going to present will come more of a summary, right, of what would have taken place before. I'm going to go through quickly in the interest of time as well, and hope you are able to gather some knowledge from this and put together with the other quite extensive presentation. Okay, so let me go. All right, so when you speak of the National Building Code, and there are some things that come maybe to you in a fuzzy way, the matter of act, regulation, and building code. One might ask, what are these, right? So let me just explain that quickly. The button that is blocking my screen. Hold on. Let me just change screen here. One moment, please. I'm gonna pause sharing here. Okay, stop sharing. The screen is not. I have to share in a different way. One moment. Okay, all right, so here we go again. All right, so, all right, here we go. So the Act, Regulation, and Building Code, what are these? An act, specifically legislative act, is a law made by Parliament, right? This is made after a bill, a proposed law is passed by the House of Senate and the House of Parliament. Regulations are rules and details on how the provision of a law is to be executed. Regulation are often delegated by Parliament by Parliament to a minister of government or other agents to be developed and amended as needed without having to return to Parliament for debate. So regulation may include fines to be imposed or breaches of the regulation. A building code is a set of rules that stipulate the standards to which building structures are to be constructed. Right. Now, the old building code, the National Building Code of Jamaica, 1983. This was a document that contained just about 95 pages. It was actually only a policy document. right? It was not enforceable by law. Between the years 1991 to 2000, a code review process was led by the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, formerly the Jamaica Bureau of Standards. The review process, I should say, was just too long. The code would become obsolete by the time it is published. And therefore, a new approach was needed, one that utilizes an efficient code producing machinery. So around 2003, the GIE, through engineer Noah DaCosta, and he presented earlier, led the charge for the development of what we know what is now named the National Building Code. Engineers such as Al Adams, Roosevelt DaCosta, and Herman Edwards provided support along with Richard Lawrence of the Bureau of Standards. The code would be established through a process of adoption of an international code as a base code. The International Building Code, IBC, produced by the International Code Council, ICC, was deemed the most fitting code for Jamaica. Among several reasons why the IBC fit is that it was found to cover all design requirements for natural disasters that affect Jamaica. And these were outlined before, like hurricanes, flooding, stuff like that, and earthquake, definitely. It will enable Jamaica to keep a pace with a code development machinery that regularly updates codes. The ICC updates its codes every 3 years, right? Going on, it covers a wide range of building types, including high-rise and commercial structures, and it makes provision for all buildings to be accessible to the disabled. Okay. The new building code now. It is not just the IBC adoption, but the IBC adoption plus the Jamaica application document for the IBC. The JAD, which is the abbreviation, Jamaica application document, presents the areas where Jamaica agrees with the particular IBC clauses and where a different stated provision developed by Jamaica will apply. But the IBC really relates to buildings that are larger than 3,000 square feet, or just approximately 300 meters square, or square meters. And in its use, other ICC code become applicable, essentially a suite of codes. So for buildings less than 3,000 square feet, the ICC International Residential Code, the IRC, for 1 and 2 family dwellings was adopted, and a corresponding JD developed to support its use. So the ICC suite of codes that are relevant to Jamaica, the ones that we needed to use, includes the International Building Code, IBC, the International Residential Code for 1 and 2 family dwellings, the International Energy Conservation Code, the International Plumbing Code, the International Existing Building Code, the International Property Management Code, the International Private Sewer Disposal Code, the International Mechanical Code, the International Fuel Gas Code, the International Code Council Electrical Code Administration Provisions, the International Electrical Code, and the International Fire Code. Okay. Coming up. Now, the National Building Code now, continuing. The National Building Code is therefore the 12 codes before mentioned, along with their relevant Jamaica application documents. So therefore, there are 12 ICC codes plus 11 JAD, Jamaican application documents, since one of the JAD is done to cover the ICC EAP, that is the International Code Council Electrical Administration Provisions, and the International Electrical Code. So one JAD was used to cover that, right? But the codes do not function in a vacuum, right? And this is where we've been speaking to quite a bit this evening. Of Jamaican law must accompany it. Therefore, on 15th of January 2019, and this was a great celebration point, the Building Act 2018 was enacted. But the ICC code, the JAD, and the Act must be used together. And this time can become cumbersome. Volumes of documents, different documents you have to pull from to determine what is the requirement for a particular matter. In 2018, the Bureau of Standards commenced a process to unify the ICC code with the JD to form a single customized document for various areas covered by the National Building Code. Right? And this is where we speak to the unification or the amalgamation of the building code. What was JS, for example, JS 306, the Jamaican application document for the International Building Code, will be captioned, if passed, the JS 306 Jamaican Standard, Jamaican Building Code, right? Essentially now, instead of being an IBC code plus the Jamaican application document, it will now be a single document called the Jamaica Building Code. So JS 306 as a draft Jamaican Building Code was put out for public comment by the Bureau of Standards Jamaica in 2021. Not sure where that is right now. Okay, so the National Building Code, importance to the Jamaican building industry. And essentially, some of this would have been addressed before, but just to reiterate a bit and just to kind of give maybe something new. To get the building code together with the Building Act serves to reduce the vulnerability of Jamaica's building environment to the shock of natural and man-made disasters. It allows for predictability in the level of safety in the use of private and public buildings, and provides assurance to local and international agencies that Jamaica's building stock is built to internationally accepted standards. It allows for the implementation of more resource-efficient buildings, and that speaks to energy efficiency and otherwise water harvesting and so on. Provides a means whereby new building systems can be evaluated for inclusion among Jamaica's building stock. And that's where I end today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen, for your presentation. We really appreciate what you've spoken about in terms of the adoption of the IBC in our building code and the amalgamation of the Building Act with the building code and the process, and how important it is for the building sector. We appreciate your presentation. Thank you. Now we're going to ask the CIC Secretary, Ms. Michelle Rose, to introduce our next presenter. So I'm going to ask our secretary to introduce our next presenter, Mr. Roosevelt da Costa.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradshaw. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have the great pleasure of introducing your next speaker, one whose work and achievement speak for itself. Mr. Roosevelt da Costa is a graduate of the University of the West Indies in the field of electrical and telecommunication engineering. He has worked in both the public and private sector for over 40 years, during which time he has been responsible for developing all 3 Jamaican building codes, the last of which is still in progress. Mr. da Costa has worked at the Bureau of Standards for over 24 years. He started as the head of the electrical department and rose to the post of deputy director. At the Bureau, he was responsible for establishing 8 metrology labs. Having left the Bureau, Mr. da Costa continued working in the area of standardization metrology and quality system. Among his latest contracted projects are the development of the Bureau metrology labs to first world standard and the development of the comprehensive building code. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Roosevelt da Costa.
Mr. da Costa, just unmute, please.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me start again. all protocols observed. I am either fortunate or unfortunate to be the last speaker. A good deal of what I had planned to say have been covered by the three speakers. Nonetheless, I think you want to see, perhaps in more details, what the roles and functions of a number of the code bodies are. And I'm going to attempt to enlighten you. First, we're going to look at the local authorities. There are two definitions I'd like you to bear in mind. They've been given by previous speakers, but they're probably worth emphasizing that when we speak of building laws, as you will see occurring throughout my presentation, I'm speaking about the 2018 Building Act of Jamaica, the building regulations, which we are yet to see. Although we have done a lot of work on them, and there's a previous speaker who indicated that we had finalized some 12 of them, and my understanding is that we should be having no more than 14 or 15. So I know of two that is unsettled, but I know not what has happened to the 12 that I believe we have been finalized. The second definition I'd like you to bear in mind is that when we speak of building works, we're looking at the totality of construction activities that involve all of what you see listed here, along with the change of building use, which incidentally is one of the most frequent incursion of the current building and planning rules. Can I go to the next slide, please? Now we're going to look at the local authority role and function. Now they have the overall responsibility to administer and enforce the building laws. And if we look at some of the activities they will pursue in that broad function, it includes accepting and considering applications for new buildings, building. Now, I'm not seeing a part of the slide. Could I ask? And I have no control in shifting, but the extreme right, some of it is cut off. Is it possible to shift over some more? Shift to the left so we can see what is on the right? No? Yeah, you almost got it. Come again. No, come back. Yeah, right, you're there, right? Yeah. Okay, so we're seeing the plethora of activities to be covered with respect to buildings here. And what you need to bear in mind is that permits are required for all of these. So if you're going to undertake repairs to major equipment or a significant part of the building, then you have to get permit to do this. If you are going to change the air conditioning system, you would need a permit to do this, because in making that change, you could be ending up moving away from the energy efficiency which the code is seeking to get under the energy code. So it's important to know that improvements are accepted, but retrogression is denied by permits. The next thing is that the local authority ensures that all building works within the area of jurisdiction is carried out in accordance with the building laws, not just the code, but also with the regulations and the Building Act. And here is something which is new. They are expected to keep and maintain full, accurate, and up-to-date records of all the receipts and processing of all applications for building permits, breaches of the building laws identified, and make the information available to the public, subject, of course, to any guideline which the local authority may have. Next slide, please. Now, the local authority should also conduct code-specified construction stage inspections and issue compliance certificates. Of course, if they comply. If they don't, then there are other things to do that will come out of the presentation. The local authorities are allowed to prescribe their fees for providing all the services. But I don't think they will be utilizing that legal tool at the moment, because I think they are allowing the ministry, the local government ministry, to guide them into setting fees at the right level, and to prevent all the problems that could arise from some persons having more lower fees than others. They're also expected to ensure that designs submitted in respect of building applications are in compliance with the building laws. And the design and supervisory aspects of building work are undertaken and executed by duly qualified persons. So you'll notice that in some of the local authorities, the qualification of some staff members are improving. Now, they are also expected to engage persons under contract, perhaps short contract, that they deem necessary for the proper performance of functions And these could be design review functions or inspection functions, which they feel they do not have in-house staff to handle. Next slide, please. Something has happened here. Okay. The local authority is expected to maintain a register of building permits containing particulars of all building permit issued. Now, if you go back to the previous slide, you will note okay, this is shifting all over the place. Okay, can we go back to this slide? Okay, yeah. Now, what is happening is that we want the local authorities to operate really as public bodies and therefore open themselves to all the work they do, the decisions they make. And while this particular clause J is about the building permit register only, they are also required to have all other activities logged and available for public scrutiny or review if anybody so care. Now, they're also expected to ensure that all new construction materials, systems, methods, and testing are approved by the Bureau and the other standards quality organizations that have been spun from the Bureau. I'm referring to organizations like JANAC, the accreditation body, and the Jamaica certification body, which is just coming on stream. Now, where there are products that are certified or listed or accredited, or the construction products or manufacturers have been accredited, then the local authority should freely grant approvals or should not question the quality of such product. So the quality systems should be coming out of the government bodies that are designed to do that. This would include the Bureau, which does quite a lot of all the measurement work, and a good deal of the testing work. And then the other bodies involved in certification and accreditation. Now, another thing which the local authority will do, I don't think they've started yet, I haven't heard of it, is the issuance of occupancy certificate expeditiously after a building construction has been completed. This enables them to look at the final built product, compare it against the permit issued, and the laws, the building laws generally, which include the codes, and to see if there's any digression that no permit was given to the building, to the contractor or to the building owner, to no digression was allowed in that particular area. If a digression is found, then that would have to be fully explored to see whether it has compromised building safety in any way. So the occupancy certificate is a means of, it's a new phenomenon, and it's a means of ensuring that those who take a permit and then do as they like, they may have problems occupying the building. They may find that the building cannot be occupied after they have built it. The other thing I'd like to say is that the local authorities are expected to administer and enforce the building laws in such a manner as to prevent negligence or dereliction of duty. If they do incur any of these in the administration of their and enforcement of their work, then you can sue the local authority, but not the individual workers. If it's clear that they had done, there was no malice, there was no intent other than to do the work. So again, there is some precedence to get remedy for what might be costly to a developer. And then they're expected to perform the functions necessary to ensure that at the end of the day, there are a few suits. Next slide, please. We're now going to look quickly at the role and functions of the Chief Engineering Officer. Now, the Chief Engineering Officer is mentioned in the code as the building official. He bears responsibility for all that is done in his department. So the actions of his workers also becomes his responsibility. Now, this office is a major and highly responsible office that should be filled by only persons with the qualification and acumen to produce these roles and functions. Now he's expected to have superintendence over all buildings and building work, as was mentioned by one of the previous speakers, and to ensure that the construction process does not create encroachment on adjoining property and public access way. Needless, I say that that's done very often in construction work in Jamaica. He needs to ensure that building work is undertaken in accordance with the building laws. So he should be allowing the community input in the intended building permit. And that comes by way of notices of intent to build that are published in places on the intended site and in places where a lot of the public visits on a daily basis. And that should ensure that people are aware of what is coming and can raise their objections if there is any. Then there are the engineering officer is also expected, unless otherwise directed by the local authority, to exercise full supervision over his officers and employees. Also authorized persons on contract, like the special experts, building professionals, and building practitioners, and so on, and contractors for the proper functioning of the local authority. So he has to interact with a wide range of the public stakeholders, building stakeholders. Sorry. Now he's to take appropriate action to identify breaches of the building laws. And in this respect, you have heard the term stop order. If he should visit, he or his representative should visit a site and find that a building under construction is creating certain potential dangers, then he can issue a stop order, in which case the contractor will have to stop the construction, and he can only resume if he's correcting the breaches identified, and he can only go beyond the breaches identified if re-inspection and re-inspection by the chief engineering officer proves that he has corrected the issues that gave rise to the stop order in an acceptable manner. Next slide. By the way, he can also issue orders to stop or to characterize the danger associated with existing buildings. If an existing building pose a hazard, then he can also take action to get these dangers corrected. Then the officer should also ensure that applications for building permits are processed in a timely manner. You heard that from a previous speaker, and in accordance with the guidelines of the local authority. He should as well approach the inspection of construction stages also in a timely manner, so that he does not hold back the contractor and incur costs for which there is no budget. The chief engineering officer is expected to prepare and submit in a timely manner reports arising from inspections, investigations, on a monthly basis. And that report should also include all other activities and achievements of the building department. So amounts, fees earned, and so on, breaches identified, and so on. All of those should be listed. And again, these should be available for public scrutiny if anyone so desires. Next slide, please. Now, the chief engineering officer in his inspection of sites of buildings under construction can refuse to approve a particular piece of building work that he has seen. If he felt, for instance, that something was covered up that didn't allow him to, let's say a reinforcement was covered up with cement and didn't allow him to inspect the reinforcing bars, he can authorize that be removed. And again, it could lead to a stop order which shuts down the construction site if the work of restoration is not proceeded with to his comfort. The officer should also inquire or examine all building materials, products, systems, methods, and so on, for the particular evidence of its quality. So you should look for certification marks or accreditation certificate or all these are evidence that the material should be accepted. Once he sees this, he shouldn't be in any doubt, and he should accept the material as meeting the standard. Now he should also, I believe that any presentation on the roles of the chief engineering officer would not be complete without showing some of the issues with which he will have to wrestle. And I cite two. Can we turn to the next page, please? No, something not. No.
I split it in two for you so you can see it better.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. There are two things I'd like to highlight in this regard. He will encounter unfamiliar or new construction situations in which he has to interpret what the code desires for situations like this. And here is where he will have to be satisfied that the intent of the code for safety and performance are met. And once he's satisfied there, then he can allow that construction, that unfamiliar or new construction. He can approve it. Secondly, it can go to the next slide. He is in a situation where he will find that laws under that impact, other laws impacting on the building laws, creates some degree of conflict. So you heard that there were a number of laws. In fact, there was a sort of a screen flash of some of those laws that impact on the building law. Laws like the Architect Registration Act. He is to ensure that in trying to ensure that he addresses the issue properly, that he must see these acts are being in addition to the building laws. So then he should make his, if the difference in the clause of the other acts or their regulation is not major or is not so much of a conflict, it's not very major difference, then he should so read the act so that they comply with the building laws. In other words, complying with the building laws for that same provision is no major difference in the act where he has that difference. If the difference is inconsistent with the building act, so far as is practicable, he shall read the inconsistency so that he shall adjust the inconsistency so that it makes the best of both worlds. I think that's the aim. If the subject to this approach in adjusting the inconsistency, if that can't be done, then he will have to apply the requirements of the building laws, because those in fact supersede the other laws in matters like this. I hope I have shown you a difficulty that he could, or two difficulties he could have in doing his job. Now we're going to go on to the standards authorities and their roles in the building laws, and particularly the code. Now you'll notice that the building laws allow the minister is allowed, sorry, the bureau is allowed to submit to the minister for promulgation the code that comes through the standards development process. The bureau also should determine the extent to which the I codes shall apply in the Jamaica building code and of course the building laws generally. And that means that changes that ensure that provisions in the I code that are not applicable in Jamaica are not given mandatory status in the code, but they are removed, and provisions for Jamaica that suits Jamaica are introduced. The Building Act also gives the certifying and the accreditation bodies a role in ensuring that the quality of building materials, testing, equipment, and so on are all of good quality. And this is done through the local body either offering certification or accreditation if it's a local body, and if a local manufacturer, a local producer, or if the local distributor can take one of those approaches to quality. Or the certifying bodies are free to take certified the certification or the accreditation of bodies that are recognized by the local body. So what I'm saying is that if JANAC, the local accreditation body, has not accredited a particular manufacturer's product, and usually when they don't accredit a product, they accredit the entire manufacturing establishment. So they look at everything, including, of course, how the product is made. If they have not done that locally, they can take this from a recognized accreditation body abroad and say, yes, we know that the quality of this product should meet the local standard because it's accredited by a recognized body. The same thing for certification, the same thing for testing. So the code and the building laws, the code as part of the building laws, and in fact the Building Act itself does allow the intervention of the certifying and accrediting bodies to ensure that this most important pillar in the building product can be guaranteed. Of course, you know that any building, any good building has about four pillars that it has to satisfy. It needs to ensure that the designers are qualified and they have done a good job of designing to a specific code. So they must satisfy the code. They must satisfy all the elements that goes into the building, all the materials, all the equipment. They must satisfy the construction process and so on and so forth in order to have a good building. So the code does allow for the quality. Okay, let's go on. Let's go to the next page. The Bureau is entitled to set updating cycle for the National Building Code. I think we had the stakeholders had agreed on six years, but I don't know if that will be met when the review takes place. Right now we're coming out of 6 years for revising the code. The Bureau is expected to provide the quality assessment testing for new and existing construction products. That's important because a number of the products are made locally, like cement and blocks and so on and so forth. And so this is the body that should be ensuring that quality in those areas are met. And where the BSJ is unable to conduct the requisite assessment tests, again, as I said earlier, they can accept their recognized testing organizations. Next. Now we're going to look quickly at building professionals. Now these are the architects, engineers, and land surveyors. They are the professionals that have registration acts governing their operation. And these persons are the board registers architects, engineers, and land surveyors, meeting minimum board specific qualification and experience. So it's not all persons with an engineering degree that will be registered as a professional engineer and therefore a building can be part of the building professional team. You need certain experience that will enable you to work on your own. Now, the important thing to note is that registrants, registered architects and engineers can work on buildings of all types and sizes. There are no restrictions once you are registered. But you should be working within your discipline, your registration discipline. So an engineer registered for mechanical work should not be doing civil engineering work and vice versa and so on. Registrants shall submit the requisite signed and stamped copies of their drawings or geotechnical and land survey data or tests and so on and so forth in order when they are applying for building permit, and the regulations, which will be published hopefully early, will detail what is expected by the local authorities in this regard. Next page, please. The professional boards should also provide, the building professionals, should be supplying all the any supplementary data which the local authorities require in order to make a decision on their permit. So if your first package doesn't have all that they would like to reach a conclusion as to whether they can give you a permit or not, they may ask you for more, and you're duty bound to provide it. Building professionals should also conduct strategic inspection of construction sites so that they know what is happening. They can control the quality of the construction and raise red flags when they need to, and corrections when those need to be addressed. Corrections and red flags shouldn't be coming only from the local authority chief engineer. Now, building practitioners should also be participating in the preparation of the occupancy certificates that occur at the end of the building cycle. And once they get this, they should be handing it over to their client, people who own the building or the developers, whoever gave them the work of design and construction supervision. Architects and registered architects and engineers, their registration board should set annual fees in registration and annual practice fees. I think in some cases this differs. The engineers require a registration fee and annual practice fees. I think the architects require some sort of initial registration fee, and I'm not quite sure what level of practice fees, whether it's annual or biannual, but I think that pretty much the same thing goes on there. But these should be paid because if they are not then you, in most instances, will fall out of good standing and be deregistered. And if you're deregistered, you can't practice. Next thing is that the registration board should be ensuring that there's disciplinary actions for all unprofessional acts of registrants. Next page, please. Good. So, and there's one other thing I should say on building professionals. Their boards should be implementing continuing education program to keep the standards of the professionals current and high. Building practitioners, you have heard a lot on them. These are the skilled construction workers like contractors, supervisors, and so on and so on and so forth. They are licensed against minimum qualification and experience again. And they are expected to practice their skills in a manner that they can work on their own or on limited guidance, supervision. And the registration, the Building Practitioners Board recognizes that there are varying levels of skill within a particular discipline. So they will have various skills levels in any one of these type of skill mentioned in one. Now, turn the page, please. Next slide. Licensees may be allowed to design only residential and small building services which do not exceed 300 square meters in size and are not complex. And bear this in mind. If the building is complex, they cannot design that building despite the size being in the range they are allowed. So they can also reproduce drawings, they can construct, they can supervise, they can conduct site inspections, and so on. But all of these must be limited to their licensed discipline. So it don't mean that all practitioners are able to do these things. You have, the board is duty bound to license you so that the public is in no way disadvantaged by your service. So you need to be experienced and qualified to do this particular work. And I'm going to end shortly by pointing out that they too must have mandatory disciplinary action for all actions that their licensees will incur that will bring the board into disrepute. And they also need to ensure that there's mandatory continuing education for all licensees. Finally, we go to the appeals tribunal. Again, one of the previous speakers touched on it. There isn't much I'm going to say about this. This is an attempt to ensure that people who feel aggrieved by the decisions of the local authority have redress once the case is reasonable. So there are some areas in which the tribunal will hear an appeal, and it involves, for instance, structures, small structures that may be built on your property for domestic animals like your dog, that do not exceed the code specified dimensions. And that's just one example. But there are a number of issues like these, and there are other issues that the appeals board will be meeting on. And the last thing I will say about the appeals board is that it won't be one board, one tribunal, sorry, not board, tribunal. There will be one tribunal to each county, and there will be additional tribunals to parishes that have the caseload for this service. And with that, I end my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Da Costa. Indeed, this was a comprehensive presentation, and I'm sure this is a lot to absorb in such a short time, but the information I'm sure is available for us to assess. We appreciate the information that has been provided as it pertains to the local authority and its role and responsibility, as well as the certification and accreditation bodies, namely the Bureau of Standards and their role, the role of the chief engineer and officer, as well as the building professionals, and the process or the procedure required for the appeals tribunal. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Da Costa. And in the interest of time, I'm now going to hand over to our moderator, Ms. Katie and Arthur Spinnock.
Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw, and thank you to your team, Mr. Noah Da Costa, Mr. Robert Woodstock, Mr. David Allen, and Mr. Roosevelt Da Costa. We now transition into our panel discussion. This is where we have the opportunity to expound on our presentations that we heard. Most of us have been sitting and listening. Now it is your turn to participate and ask questions. Our panelists include our presenters, that's Mr. Da Costa, Noel Da Costa, Mr. Woodstock, Mr. Allen, and Mr. Roosevelt Da Costa, and one of our own CIC members, Mr. Dean Burrows. Now, as we move into the question and answer, we all have an opportunity to share, and I'm going to ask Ms. Rochelle Channa Miller to help with any questions that may come up in the chat. Rochelle?
Will do. There are no questions just now, but feel free to send a message to admin CIC or admin 2 if you would like me to read those questions. And please accept apologies from Mr. David Allen, who has a conflicting an appointment tonight, so he had to leave.
Okay, thank you for the update. Now, let's start the process. First, let me ask, how far are we with the codes, with the national codes, national building codes?
Okay, well, we have a national building code in effect from 2009. So the 2009 Jamaica code is the current building code. We did do a revision of that code in 2015, but the Bureau didn't publish the revised version of that code because just about that time, the World Bank gave us firm indication that they wanted to help us to generate a unified building code, meaning a code that would incorporate all the relevant areas of the application document, the international code, the Jamaica Building Act, and the regulations under that act.
Okay.
That process of generating a unified code is in progress. There are two major codes that have gone through the promulgation process and have been sent to the International Code Council that is currently going through and doing the formatting and clarification work as to reach the printing stage, which they will do at some when this is completed. Now, those two with the ICC is the fire code and the building code. The small building residential code was completed in December. The draft was completed in December. I think the Bureau has it out for public comments at the moment. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when that ends. But it would be, they should be soliciting public comments for a 2-month period. It's best to ask them when that period ends.
All right. Thank you so much for the updates.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Karian, hi. I have Mr. Dean Bradshaw raising his hand, but before we acknowledge, there's a question in the chat, and this is from Noel Da Costa's presentation.
Okay.
It's coming from Monique Rose, and she's asking for clarity. What is meant by the construction approvals will now be required? Is this the same as a building permit? That's from Noel Da Costa's presentation. Is Mr. Da Costa on? Noel Da Costa?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, clearly.
Yes. What I'm speaking about here is construction stage approvals. So it is in essence, the building permits, you get a building permit initially, but during the building process, there are certain stages within the construction of the building that you need to get the sanction of what Roosevelt described as the construction engineer or the building engineer to move to the next stage.
Okay.
Is that clear?
I hope it answered the question.
Approval.
I hope it answered the question. Ms. Rose?
Not sure who asked the question.
Right.
I'm not seeing her responding, so I do believe it does. I think Mr. Bradshaw raised his hand for a question as well.
Right, so we can take Mr. Bradshaw until. Thank you, Mr. Da Costa, for responding. Mr. Bradshaw?
Yes, good night again, everybody. I am just seeking some clarity on, well, the act speaks to creation of several bodies or institutions. For example, the Billing Appeal Tribunal and the Practitioners Board. The last presenter made reference to the tribunal, and he was saying that that the tribunal will have several tribunals based upon geographic locations. So my question is that in the act, or is that a recommendation of how the tribunal should function, and is it also applicable to how the practitioners board will function?
It's in the act.
For the tribunal to be, because I saw it as just one body, but you're suggesting that there will be several.
No,
Right.
it's in the act. If you read the act, it's saying at the very least you will have 3 tribunals, 1 for each county. But
okay,
there will be others in parishes that warrant it. So obviously, the caseload is going to determine how many more other than the 3 we have and where they will be.
Okay. No, I don't have a problem with it. It actually sounds very efficient in terms of executing its functions, but I just wasn't clear as if it was a recommendation of how it should perform, or it was explicitly stated in the act, you know? Because sometimes we find the things are legislated and people don't necessarily follow it. Okay, all right, thanks for that.
All right, thank you, Sir Bradshaw. Michelle, I see some comments in the questions in the chat.
Okay, you want me to ask them? Okay, Mr. Robinson is asking that he's noted that there are no mention of the quantity surveyors, planners, or other professions such as planners. Is it that they are not considered as professionals or considered for professionals?
Ms. Rose, can I answer this question here? Being a panelist, I
Yes,
think
Mr.
it's
Brown.
important that it's addressed, because the act under section 3 includes that, for instance, cost effectiveness in industry, fair and efficiency in the system for resolution of building disputes. Those are some of the aims of the act, and those weren't really mentioned individually. But one of the things that, from the perspective of the quantity surveyors, we see a loophole with regard to the protection for the most vulnerable in the area of costs, because we recognize that effective demand will affect supply, and therefore cost must be a concern here for those who are thinking of building. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that the quantity surveyors advise persons in the industry, in fact, advise all the other professionals in the industry with regard to cost. And it's amazing that if they were outside advising private individuals with regard to the sort of money that that sort of money, they would need license to be advisors, financial advisors, and we do it every day. Therefore, they become a critical cog in the wheel for the industry. And tonight it would appear that we have been looking mainly at technical matters and not cost matters. But to avoid the cost thing is to avoid a critical part, because money is the fuel on which this whole industry runs. And if you don't have effective demand, we can't have effective supply. So if we don't consider cost, the whole industry will die. All our plans are going to just start to go all the way down. We notice that the only professionals are recognized because they have legislation, and the architect Woodstock did mention that that was something that came up, and that was addressed for architects. But I would suggest that professionals who are widely recognized internationally ought to be recognized or be allowed to regularize themselves, especially if they are governed by a professional body, 1. And 2, I would, in the instance we should get away from this differentiation of professionals by only law, the fact that there's an act, and not by qualification.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Boros. Other question coming up, Miss Rose?
Mr. Turnbull has a question. The last presenter mentioned that the act will require the local approved authority to do an occupancy approval at the end of the project. Would that rival the practical completion certificate that is issued by the architect, or does it supersede that of the architect?
Well, I don't know that it rivals the practical completion certificate of the architect. The architect may want to look at the occupancy certification and perhaps decide that they no longer need that particular document, which they've been issuing now. But the occupancy certificate is going to be exhaustive in looking at all the issues that impinges on the permit, the building permit and building laws. And to the extent that the building has satisfied the requirements, then I would think that the owner of a building should be able to pay against that certification, or would want to pay. You'd still have to do your detailed accounts. But in terms of the totality of things that generates payment, I would think that the occupancy certificate will become one of them.
Okay.
Mr. Woodstock, I think would like to address this question.
Tina, before you go, let me just, Mr. Robinson had following his question, wanted Mr. Da Costa's viewpoint on the question that he had asked. So let me just.
Before you go on, Michelle, I think Mr. Woodstock,
respond.
And we'll go back to Mr. Robinson's own.
Just to say that they are similar and different, required for different things. One is required under the Building Act and would be done by the local authority. The other one is required under the building contract between an owner or employer and a contractor, where for certain releases of retention and so on, the architect has to provide a practical completion certificate. That's not to say, as Presenter Da Costa had said, that they can't be similar, they can't look at one or use information from the other, but contractually they are different.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Woodstock, for adding. Sir Boros?
Robinson wanted a question asked.
All right, so we can go back to Mr. Robinson's question, where he says he was asking Mr. Da Costa to respond to queries before that he had regarding the surveyors and other professionals. He'd love for your input.
Okay, my understanding is that registration is for you to have registration of a profession. You must have an act. Now, I know that the surveyors and the planners have both made petition to the legislators for registration acts. And I know very little about what is happening to those, but the opinion I came to, having heard both sides, is that it just required time to have the draft done. So I don't know if there's a way in which either these professions could find a way to produce a more expeditious draft. As to the contents of their registration act, and whether government would be willing to take that and fashion it to what they would be satisfied with. But I don't know that it won't happen. But when it will happen, I have no clue.
All right, so in essence, we're looking at just the registered professionals,
Legislated.
right, those legislated. And from that, I'm sure those who are legislated will refer to the other professionals and ensuring that whatever is being done is carried out in an efficient way. So I hope the panel has been able to answer your question, Mr. Robinson, efficiently. All right. So any other questions?
Sorry, yes. One thing I would like to raise here.
Sure.
The impact of the 3,000 square meters of building that is allowed under the act. We must realize that this covers the majority of buildings, residential buildings. The average residential building in Jamaica is far less than 3,000 square meters.
300
square meters. And as building costs increase, people are scaling down. So buildings are literally becoming more and more smaller and more efficient. Do you think the cat has been let out of the pigeon has been let out of the coop, or so that whoever draftsman can design the majority of buildings around? I leave that to be answered by the thing. But I would like also to put into the mix, wouldn't it have been better to have the cost of construction be the yardstick and say the National Housing Trust lends $8 million to the average person, instead to say building practitioners cannot design anything that exceeds $8 million. Let's hear what the panel has to say.
Would you say on that, Mr. Burrows, would you say that's a weakness of the act?
A very, very, very gaping loophole.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me respond first. To begin with, as far as I know, most Jamaican residences of under 300 square meters ends up having some complexity in the construction or design that would rule out building practitioners doing the building. So I think where the effort needs to go is not with the definition, but with the regulators. Are they going to be vigilant enough to ensure that if they get buildings with the spiral staircases, with walls at angles, with cantilevers, and all the other complexities defined in the code, are they going to ensure that they do not take any such building design from building practitioners but say such designs must come from building professionals as the code clearly outlines. If that happens, I am prepared to say that despite costs, the number of buildings that the percentage of buildings in the residential sector that I can see the draftsmen designing would drop to somewhere in the vicinity of about 5%. So what I hear is that people want to find in the laws and in the codes that only engineers and architects registered engineers and architects are allowed to design buildings. I can tell you this, that no country in the world has that situation. All of the developed countries have buildings designed by non-professionals. And I dare say that in Jamaica, you're not going to get any government, whether they are on the right or the left, to agree to such a clause in the code. Because they have constituents that they also have to protect. A little man out there in far distant rural areas has a house to build, and his son goes to UTech, does the engineering building course, cannot get registration or has not yet gotten registration, meet registration standards. And he wants him to design his little bungalow out there. Who is going to be able to say that he shouldn't be able to do this? It's a question posed by a minister of local government to me. And when you consider it, and when you consider what happens in the developed countries as well, you see that you're not going to win on that score. Where we will get
3,000 square feet is not a little bungalow. That's the bottom line. 3,000 square feet
That
is
is
not
exactly
a
it.
little bungalow.
That's it.
But I'm saying where you need to take the fight is whether the building type can be designed safely, whether the design can be done safely by certain people. And that's why we get into the complexity issue. And we have defined some 20, I think it's 22 now areas of building complexity that rules out the practitioner designing the building, although they may be under 300 square meters.
Mr. Da Costa, are we relying on the discretion of officers who may not be professionals in themselves, because there's no mandate in the bill which says those building officers, even the building, the chief engineer, that he ought to be a professional. So are we relying on the discretion of such persons?
Exactly.
I'm not relying on discretion, sir. I'm relying on education. Right? Once the people are taught about the code, once they are taught about the law that precludes people from the local authority from carrying on certain actions that are illegal. Hopefully, they will comply with the safety issue that I have outlined, because nobody want more complexity in their buildings than Jamaicans. I'm telling you this.
We will not be shutting out, Mr. DaCosta, we will not be shutting out the practitioner who choose to design. If we say to him, the housing trust is prepared to give you $8 million, design within that $8 million. What we're saying to him is that, listen, if you see something.
If you use CASA, he's going to design unsafe buildings. With the first shake, it come down and kill those who have been paying back the $8 million.
Jamaicans don't have unlimited funds, Mr. DaCosta. We all build to cost.
It still does not mean that we are entitled to give them houses that will fall on them in a major earthquake.
So can we agree to disagree?
I don't agree that because of our poverty, we can allow people to be living in unsafe houses and complying with the code.
Mm-hmm. And we totally agree, because we want an environment where everybody's safe, and that is what the Act is all about. So my question is, if these persons are given the tools to build below the 300 square meters, who now governs and ensure that what is done is in compliance with the Act?
They still have to send their drawings to the local authority for building permit.
But then again, the question is, does the local authority have the resources to address all these concerns?
That's right.
They must. The law authorizes them so to do, to put it in place.
But
the Building Act tells them that they need to have the people to do the work required.
Okay, so we look forward to our local authority, Mr. Rose, to be able to ensure that this is part of what happens going forward.
And the Building Act.
Hold a minute. Mr. Noel?
The Building Act also says that if the local authority doesn't have the required expertise in-house, they can contract building professionals to do the work.
Okay. Okay. You had something to add again, Mr. Roosevelt?
Yes, ma'am. I'm saying that I, like many Jamaicans, know that no matter what law you have, there are some Jamaicans that are going to try to break it. We must be vigilant to find some of those who are doing it and make an example of them. And that will stop both the local authority approving it, granting building permit for it, and them designing it. So where we need to begin to put all this effort in trying to get an act that tells you only architects and engineers can design buildings in Jamaica. Where we need to put that energy is not there, but in ensuring scrupulous adherence to the building laws.
And that I agree with.
Watch the regulation. Watch the enforcement. Take to the courts offenders of the building laws who are not enforcing right, or who are not obeying the courts. And you will find more and more, or let me put it another way, you will find less and less persons prepared to do the design that they can handle.
All right.
So
Any other
let's, all of us on the same page, but let's fight intelligent. We're fighting on the grounds of building complexity outside of the remit of practitioners to design.
All right, thank you. So we have some more questions and we're limited for time. We want to close off by no later than 8:25 because I know we have gone beyond. So, Ms. China Miller?
Okay, so I think Mr. Robinson's question about complexity was addressed, and the other comments that line up with that argument were addressed. So we will go to Carisha Witter's question. Having invested in an architectural education and now eligible for applying to register to sit the ARE exams, how does the panel distinguish draftsmen versus architectural trained graduates from accredited and validated architectural institutions? The Caribbean School of Architecture, for example, does not train draftsmen, does it? Or is it VDTI community college that do, community colleges that do rather?
So basically, what's the definition? Anybody on the panel want to take on that question?
Well, I am not an architect and I shouldn't be the one responding first, but all I would say to her, having done her studies, I am sure she would meet the qualification to be registered as a professional architect. What she needs to do next, concentrate on getting the experience and then register as a professional architect. And she can do any building of any type, of any size, of any complexity.
All right.
And she can sue those who encroach on areas that they don't have competence.
So what really defines that practitioner? What is the qualifications that practitioner really need to have?
It's a wide area, you know, because practitioners can have degrees too. I mentioned that the persons who do the construction engineering course at UTech, I don't know if the situation has changed recently, but I know up to recently, they could not obtain registration because their course does not meet the criteria. Right? So they would come out with an engineering degree and still cannot be a professional engineer. As a matter of fact, it gets worse than that. The Engineering Registration Act forbids you to call yourself an engineer if you're not registered. And therefore, despite him having an engineering degree, he cannot call himself an engineer. He would be, if he does so, he is infringing, he's committing a crime under the Engineering Registration Act.
Can I agree with Mr. Da Costa there? Can I agree there? The professional is an individual who has reached the standards of the professional body that govern his profession. He follows the ethical principles and he has the academic and experience qualification. It is not a legislative recognition. The act, what the act does is takes away from the professional that sort of qualification and says to him, only if you are of a law in Jamaica that makes you a professional that we'll recognize. He might be recognized right across the world at the highest level as a professional. But Jamaica says, if you don't have a Jamaican law governing you, you are not a professional. That's what they're trying to say. But we can understand that. But every professional has a duty of care, and a professional is guided by his ethics.
Okay, great.
You know, sir, you know, let me respond to that. I'm not saying anything that doesn't hold in the US. and in England. The fact that they may allow certain things that look, for instance, the chiropractor is called a doctor in the US. Don't mean you don't, if you want to practice medicine as we know it, you don't have to register and become a professional. You're going to have to sit a serious exam in addition to all your university qualification. You're going to have to sit not only one. In fact, I have a son who became an architect, a registered architect in the state. And he had to do something like 19 papers in his architect registration exams. He couldn't do them all at once. He had to do them over a couple of years.
All right, so we're understanding the dynamics of our act and what is required of who are practitioners and who are registered professionals. Carisha Whittle, we notice your hand has been up. Ms. Whittle?
Yes. Hi there. Good evening, everyone. Yes, just a follow-up to my question in terms of the term building practitioner being very broad, in a sense that I do respect the opinion stated by the panel. However, how do you distinguish someone who is on the path to their registration versus someone who has not even embarked on or started the process? No, for me, trying to understand the act and the basis of it, for instance, in Jamaica, the Caribbean School of Architecture was established for a reason, right? And it is to facilitate the training of candidates who potentially want to become registered architects without having to leave the English-speaking Caribbean. There are some persons who have started that process, and there are some persons who were not successful or have never started that process. Why is everyone put in the same category and called draftsmen or building practitioners if they haven't even made the first step towards what is required to become the registered professional that has a duty and liability and so on? That is my main concern, and that's what I'd hope would come out of the question that was asked. I'm not sure if that's being received, but that is essentially what I'm trying to communicate here. Because it's not a dime a dozen situation. It's a rigorous process, and it's an institution that you have to be vetted to get into, and it takes rigor to matriculate or to graduate from, right? So I'm just saying, why was it established in the first place? You know, it was a feat that was achieved in Jamaica and the English-speaking Caribbean for a reason. If you see the history of the Caribbean School of Architecture, so is it that we're erasing that? Is it that we're now putting everybody in one category and you don't have to take the necessary steps required to be trained to embark on that profession?
Well, Carisha, you have to undergo training. That's one part of becoming a professional. And I suspect the Architect Registration Board, which I don't know anywhere near as well as the Engineering Registration Board, sets minimum required qualification for that. I'm sure studying at the local architectural institutions can get you, if not qualified, perhaps close to qualifying. But I'm speaking about an area I don't know enough of, so I shouldn't be talking about the architects anyhow. But this much I want to say, that your training does have importance and does help you to get to the professional status. And I would never think that the Caribbean Architectural School has no use. Far from it. In fact, I also know, and this is happening not only in Jamaica, that some people prefer to work under somebody else. And if you have architectural qualification and experience, and you prefer to work under a registered architect, you can do almost anything other than signing the work, the drawings or the reports as a professional engineer. The same thing happened in America. As an engineer, you can go up there and work under engineers and do your or operate as a professional in.
I think we're losing Mr. Da Costa. All right. So I see some responses and some comments in the chat. So I'm going to ask if persons can read, because I think some are in response to Ms. Witter's question, but ultimately what we're gathering is there are two distinctions. Yeah, in this element, you have the professional and you have the practitioners. Ms. Witter, I would suggest don't give up. You have a price. The practitioners only have a limit in terms of how they are to operate. Your scope will be broader, and therefore you are more open to being able to do more as a professional under the Act. So it's just that the practitioners, there is a particular limitation on what they can do. Mr. Woodstock?
But I think she made a very good point, because the limit is so broad that she could not have it, that degree. I haven't seen what the requirements are under the Building Practitioners Board to be qualified or to be licensed there. But certainly, as long as she could design luxury houses under 3,000 square feet, as long as they're defined as simple buildings, and make a practice of that, and never have to finish her architecture degree.
Yeah, but she wouldn't have much of a market, because.
And likewise, someone who never started.
Hold on, Ms. Witter. Finish, Mr. Da Costa.
Yes, I'm saying I wouldn't advise her to go that route of trying to design only the simple buildings, because that is going to be a small percentage of the total building stock. Jamaicans, for instance, there's hardly a house you can find without a suspended slab. That's a complexity. It cannot be.
The majority of buildings don't have suspended slabs.
Huh?
Majority of residents in Jamaica don't have suspended slabs.
That's right.
They don't have cantilevers.
No.
Zero.
They don't have concrete.
They don't have spiral stairs.
Yeah. They have spiral staircase.
I said they don't have spiral stairs.
They have,
because it's single story.
Single story.
Look up more.
They have concrete roof.
No concrete roof.
They have walls at an angle.
None.
All right, Desmond, we can continue this discussion, but time is upon us. And I must say thank you so much to everyone who is here still with us and who has been able to contribute not only to the discussion, but just being here with us at 8:30 p.m. Let me use the opportunity also to say thank you to all for participating in our program. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did in presenting the information to you. Thank you again to CIC and our presenters for your deliveries. You're able to encapsulate the theme and bring the information to life, and hence why we're having such a very vibrant discussion. Please bear in mind that CIC, this webinar is the first in a number of series. So look out for more information to come as we expand more on the Building Act. Behind the scenes, I must say thanks for the assistance from Ms. Michelle Rose, Mrs. Rochelle Chana Miller, and Dr. Beal. As we leave here, we go motivated together as we strive to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Thank you and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Whatever questions, I'm going to see if we can answer them and then circulate the responses where possible. All right.